Hey, this is a manga analysis of Volume 1 of Fullmetal Alchemist. And I want to reread through all of the whole story, so I started Volume 1. I'm going to pay close attention to some of the finer details, the stuff I might have missed my first time through, and kind of catch stuff, just kind of re-experience the story. So pretty much everything we're going to talk about here mostly does take place in the very first chapter. That's where there's a little more fine details to comb over. So since it was the introductory chapter. So we have the first couple pages. It's just this quick flashback. If you pay attention, you'll notice that obviously he already lost his leg. But then suddenly we're in this other town, and we meet the two strangers, and they're just like chilling at this food joint, and they're talking whatever kind of set up stuff that's going on in town. But the radio breaks, right? And then they perform like a magic trick, and voila, they fixed the radio. So what that's it's kind of it seems like a lot like a magic trick. Like alchemy is magic. That you put your hands together, you draw a little circle, and bada bing, you just you know you just did some crazy magic stuff. The cool thing about Fullmetal Alchemist is that it kind of balances its fantasy with science. And obviously alchemy is treated as a science in the universe of Fullmetal Alchemist, but there are like spiritual components to it, and that's a little more obvious. But one thing I really picked up while rereading this chapter was that when they run across into the priest in town, he's using an alchemy trick with one of these little stones on his ring. That's something I actually want to reread about, because that's something I never quite figured out. It's like, what kind of material is he using to be able to get some extra alchemy powers? So that part I never really figured out yet. But that's why I'm rereading it. But he's effectively performing magic tricks and swindling all these people. What it really comes down to is that alchemy is not magic, it's a science, and the worst type of magician is someone who uses their tricks to fool a bunch of people into some kind of swindle, like maybe believing in a false religion, or obviously he's doing it pretty much for money purposes, or to gain influence in the town. So the worst type of magician uses fake magic tricks to fool people, and alchemy is not magic. And this priest is like the worst kind of magician. And so it establishes a very hard line that there is a spiritual component to it, but alchemy is very much a science. It's not magic. When they start to catch some heat from the priest, they get captured here. We get a little bit more action. The priest calls him out, right, and tries to be not a prophet, but a false, kind of a still manipulative using his fake magic. The priest learns about the hero's backstory. He says that that they've committed the worst possible sin, and then if alchemy purely is a science, then can you really take it too far? And that's, I think, one of the things that the entire story of Fullmetal Alchemist goes over, is that if it is science, like, can it go too far? And that's something we see the Elric boys do off the bat, is that they've committed the worst possible sin when they did some weird shenanigans in their basement. And then that's mostly what we learn about in Chapter 2, is just kind of the backstory and the action and the resolution to that story. So they expose him. But at the end of chapter two, Rose is this character in this town, and she was believing what the priest was saying, because she really wants to bring her mother back. And that's the same thing what Alphonse and Edward tried doing. And so she's at a complete loss what to do now. And we get a pretty straightforward answer from Edward saying, "Stand up and walk, keep moving forward, and at least you have strong legs to take you there." So she's completely lost after losing her mother for pretty much for good. There's no hope of bringing her back, and that's exactly the situation that Elric and Alphonse got into. Is that there's no chance of them being able to bring back their mother, and they just kind of have to get up and move along, and keep fighting whatever their goals are at this point in the story. Just keep trucking along, and that's what they leave Rose with. For the most part, that's kind of kind of the big breakdown for this, is that it tries to really make sure that you don't get stuck thinking in the very beginning of the story that alchemy is some kind of just magic with some kind of energy level that you learn how to use or whatever, like a lot of other stuff. But it's a science, and you can learn how to do it. And there's no power level, like there's good alchemists and there's bad alchemists. There's talented ones and people who study a lot, but there's no Edward is powerful because he has XYZ number of metachlorians or whatever. It's just nothing like that. It's a science. You can learn it, you can study it, and it's all about your understanding of that science and how you use it. And honestly, I like the alchemy, the way alchemy works in Fullmetal Alchemist. It seems like it really does take a PhD level of intellect and studying to master it. You can't just draw a little circle on the ground and make stuff happen. It takes a lot of studying, and if you think about how much time they study, it really is like a just to be proficient at alchemy, you probably need to be spent a lot of time trying to master it. It's nothing that you can just when we see the state alchemist, honestly, the state alchemist would be about a PhD level, probably full, for the most part. And they also obviously get positions in the military for that. But and then in the other chapters, there's the mining town. The only real takeaway here is the officer that's in charge of the town. He basically owns the whole town, pretty much through a aristocracy kind of type method, where from his connections, he's in the military as a lieutenant, and he runs this town, and he siphons off the taxes, and he makes himself rich. He owns the entire town. He's basically an aristocrat that is a corrupt politician that gets to own these people that are trying to just make a living. And that story is fixed by Edward swindling him into a deal, and then gifting back the town back to the people that own it or run it. And then the final chapter is just the train, and there's a train heist, and it's pretty much all. It's just it's a good action set piece for the final chapter of the volume. There's nothing really going on there. There's a lot of good action. It's a good chapter, but nothing really to dig into. But they do kind of introduce the other military characters just as a good spot to open the door for that. Not even as an introduction, but they're just kind of there. They have a very small role in this chapter, but they're technically introduced. Literally last page of the chapter, they introduce Roy Mustang. And that's it. That's the breakdown of Volume 1. And then everything else that has to go with the plot and stuff. But yeah, this is actually a really good book, and actually a really good introduction to a magic. I'd still consider it a fantasy magic, sciencey, with the flavor of science kind of system, like alchemy. It's really good. And there's a lot of stuff to dive into with Fullmetal Alchemist. So that's just the first chapter, the first volume.